Okay, well, welcome. Nice sort of seeing everybody, right? So we'll
I
call the
will
meeting.
note just a minute that I've had a couple of blankouts, but it comes back. So I don't know. Did you have that too, Tom?
I've had a couple the last several days. My screen freezes up. I can sometimes hear people, but
Okay, I can hear everything, so we'll just not worry too much about it unless that goes away.
Yeah.
Okay,
Zoom has
Well,
its
just-
drawbacks on occasion.
just wave, Barbara, that you can't hear people.
Okay.
So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the May 12th. Somebody say something?
I think we're going in and out again.
It sounds like somebody besides us is talking.
Yeah, I don't hear anything other than JT was the
Okay.
last.
Okay. All right, well,
All right,
what I was saying,
I will move to approve the minutes for the regular meeting of May, if I can read it, 12th, 2020, as submitted.
I second.
motion in a second to approve the minutes of the May 12th meeting. Any questions on that? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. The public portion,
Yes, sir. We invited comments from the public to be submitted and none have been received.
fair enough. We'll go to new business, which is the first item is the Killarney Drive Bridge.
Yes, sir. Recall that the board approved an MOU between MUB and the city last month for the replacement of the Killarney Drive Bridge and storm culvert. We've now opened bids for that on June 4th. The bids were extremely competitive with a very narrow range between the four lowest of the 5 bidders. But the low bid was about $80,000 higher than we had estimated. We've reviewed the bid. We've talked with the contractor. We're convinced that it's a reasonable and valid bid, and our estimate was just low. We've consulted with the city, and the city stands by their approval of the contract, and they remain committed to the project at the higher price. So our respective shares have each gone up $40,000. With that confirmation from the city, it's our recommendation that the low bidder be approved and awarded the contract.
I just had a question, what you thought the reason it was so much higher than expected was. Just the workload that's happening right now, or?
That may be part of it. It's a tight working area where it's in a residential neighborhood and there's not a lot of elbow room for the contractor to spread out. I think that might be a factor in it. I suspect, and this is just a guess on my part, our previous jobs where we had done work like this, we were doing multiple culverts. And so we may have enjoyed a lower cost of efficiency, but by virtue of having done that, where this one is just a single culvert, and that might have driven the price up some.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
When will the work start, Tim?
Assuming we give them the award tomorrow, it'll be a function of how quickly they get their paperwork to us. We're prepared. We'll give the contractor a notice of award immediately tomorrow.
Okay.
Then the next hoop is they have to deliver their insurances and bonds to us, and that might take them as little as a week. It might take them a month. So that's out of our control.
Okay. All righty. So looking for a motion.
So I'll move to accept the bid and award a contract to Green River Group for the Killarney Drive Bridge Replacement Project, contract number 4-2020 at a price of $282,215 and authorizing the general manager to execute all documents related to said contract.
Okay, motion and a second to approve the acceptance of the bid from Green River Group for the Colony Drive Bridge replacement. Questions on the bid?
Was that Sarah or Barbara who did the second?
Barbara.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes. Okay, we have a bid for the paving at Coben Valley Lane.
Yes, sir. The Cobin Valley Lane and the M-Tech Drive over at near White Park. Both of these areas are areas where we need to permanently restore the roadway after construction of the raw water line. This is a case where our bids came in lower than we had expected. So in the grand scheme of things, it all kind of washes out. These bids were open June 18th. They were also very competitive. We've had success with the low bidder and recommend approval of their bid.
Okay,
All right, I move to approve the acceptance of the bid from and award of a contract to Paving for the Coven Valley Lane and M-Tech Drive paving project, contract number 5-2020, at a price of $44,000 and authorizing the general manager to execute all documents related to said contract.
Second.
I'll second.
Sorry, Sarah.
Oh, whoever, it doesn't matter.
okay, Barbara made the motion, Sarah seconded. So we have a motion to approve the bid from Parada Paving for the Coben Valley Lane and M-Tech Drive paving project. Questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody? So that motion is approved as well. Okay, let's get into the budget there, Tim.
Yes, sir. The highlight of the month. Your packet includes 4 budgets. We operate 4 different enterprise funds, essentially: water, sanitary sewer, Cheat Lake sewer, and stormwater. In past years, our goal has always been to present the board a balanced budget, but in the last couple of years, we've taken the approach instead of not padding, not underreporting revenues, not padding expenses in order to present worst cases, but to present you what we think is the actual financial year ahead. And we've also committed to reflecting capital improvements and expenditures on a level as they should be. Now, we'll probably mention a couple of times in this discussion, because we have postponed a rate increase, we have throttled back. We've cut back on the actual expenditures that we perform for the purpose of minimizing the damage to the budget. But for the purpose of using the budget as a predictive tool and using it to indicate to us what our financial condition will likely be, we've projected those capital improvements at the levels where they should normally occur. And so what I'm saying is we're predicting deficits in most cases because we've shown expenditures at the level where they ought to be. While I will tell you now, in the past year and in the coming year, we have managed those expenditures and reduced them where we can so that the actual budget performance is better or not as bad as the formal budget predicted. So with that, yes, please.
So my question is, how do you cover the deficits?
Some of that's with cash flow. Luckily, so far, we've not had to make a withdrawal from our investment reserve, but we do have an investment reserve, a rainy day fund. And in the worst case, we would rely upon that rainy day fund.
So you have a backlog of bills? Is that what I'm hearing? Is that you're using cash flow to pay things when you have the money and basically not when you don't?
No, we don't. I guess our cash flow is so substantial that we seldom find ourselves short of cash.
Then how do you, so you don't make the I'm sorry to beat a dead horse here, but so you don't make the capital improvements.
Right.
So that's one way to cover the deficit. How do you cover the remainder?
Well, again, if cash flow demanded it, we would make a withdrawal from the investment reserve. And Deb, please speak up. I'm not aware that that's been necessary. Have you had to do that?
I don't see Deb.
She's on mute, I think.
Okay, well, I don't see a response from her.
So is there enough in the rainy day fund to cover this deficit? And then what kind of a cushion does that leave you?
Yeah, there's, in round numbers, there's between 10 and 11 million dollars in the rainy day fund in that investment reserve. So there's enough there to cover this. And again, the actual performance will not be as bad as the projected performance is shown to be.
Yeah, but still, if you've got $1 million deficit in each of the 4 accounts, then you've only got a couple of years before you start feeling a squeeze.
Right.
I
That's the significant point, really, for this entire discussion, is that, you know, we had an inflation-based rate increase scheduled to go into effect next week.
Yep.
And we've postponed it first because of the delays in our project at White Park, and then we got on solid footing project-wise from that, and then COVID hit, and so we've recognized that it's not good PR to try to implement a rate increase during the COVID impacts, and so we are, in terms of the implementation and effect of that rate increase, we're going to be at least 6 months late. And this budget assumes that we're going to be a year late. This budget ignores any rate increase. And it does assume the worst case, that it'll be next July 1 before our rates go into effect. Now, if COVID is not any more difficult for the rest of the year than it is now, that we might be able to improve on that timing and perhaps get a rate increase in effect, say January 3rd quarter of the year, perhaps. But for this budget, we've assumed that it won't go into effect until the following July 1 of 2022.
How will the bond buyback and issuance help or hurt? Or will that give you any cover?
It will, but it's relatively modest. That bond refinancing will save us somewhere between $200,000 per year and $400,000 per year. I think we've used the midpoint of that range, $300,000 in the budget. So this budget reflects those savings, the benefit of that refinance.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll proceed into a discussion fairly detailed of each of the 4 separate budgets. And again, just interrupt me if I'm going too quickly or if you have a question. Starting with the water budget. Did I hear a question?
I have a question. One, whenever I put my hand up to my ear here, I'm not hearing any audio. So if you see that on the screen, you might slow down a little bit.
All right.
Second is what's the likelihood we may get some reimbursement from the state on the COVID expenses?
I think 0.
Yeah.
Just being blunt about it, I think it's 0. And if we do get reimbursement from the state, it'll be so modest that it won't even change a decimal point in the budget.
Okay.
I'm on the board of another organization that is looking for some reimbursement from the state, and was told basically point blank by the governor that the plan is to use that money to fill budget holes.
That's the same thing that I've heard, that essentially the state is going to keep it and not let it hit the streets in the cities and utilities.
They have no intention of sharing it at all.
Right.
Unless they have no other choice.
Yeah, I hear the same, and I suspect that is true. Is everyone still hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So the water budget shows a projected deficit. What we'll do as I discuss each of these budgets is I'll look first at the projected condition for, I guess it's later this week, for June 30th of 2020. So looking at how the current budget is ending, and then I'll transition over to the budget for the future year. So we're projecting a closing deficit of $1.6 million, June 30th of 2020. Now that's a deceiving, and every one of these budgets recognize that these numbers that we give you are essentially snapshots on June 30th, and they're not really representative of the entire year. And so I'm going to describe to you what I think are reasonable adjustments that need to be made when we talk about that ending position, whether it's a deficit or a surplus. So we're projecting a deficit of 1.6 million as of June 30 this year. That is larger than the true budget condition will be. There's an excess because of the timing of when work is done versus when the bond proceeds are received. Ideally, our bond work cost and our bond proceeds credited to the budget would be synchronized, but they're not synchronized. And for that reason, there's a difference, and that difference affects the budget and needs to be adjusted out. So we've basically charged an excess of $700,000 of construction for which reimbursement has either not yet been received and will be received in a week, which is actually next budget year if it's received next week, or that reimbursement was received this time last year and charged to the previous, credited to the previous year's budget. But for either one of those reasons, the effect is the same, that there's more construction charged to the current budget than there were bond proceeds to offset that, and that there's about $700,000 of that. So that deficit of 1.6 million, if you adjust that 700,000 out, becomes an adjusted deficit of $979,000 and some change. That deficit includes a revenue shortfall of about $515,000 that we think is probably related to COVID. Now, I'll disclose that there has been a growing, slow, incremental trend towards lower water use and therefore lower water and sewer billings. So that trend may contribute some to this. But there's a $515,000 shortfall between actual revenues and budgeted revenues for the closing year. If we remove that $515,000, which clearly some large portion of that is COVID related, then the adjusted deficit is $464,000 and change. And that compares reasonably well to the budgeted deficit that we had projected a year ago of $482,000. Now, switching focus and looking at the coming budget year, which begins July 1, it shows a projected deficit of $1.5 million this time next year. Approximately 500,000 of that is COVID related. We have assumed and projected lower revenues, lower sales due to COVID for the year. And that we've, again, about $500,000 of that is shown in the water budget. And so that adjusted deficit for the coming year would then be just over $1 million, making that adjustment.
And that's without any rate increase at this point.
Correct.
Okay.
And you say that you adjust for COVID, but the fact of the matter is you still have that loss. You're just explaining it.
That's correct.
So really to say the deficit is really only $1 million when it's actually $1.5 million.
You're absolutely right. I think that the reason I've differentiated it though is that my sense from our previous discussions is that the board will not try to recover those COVID costs from the ratepayers, that the board has agreed to absorb that loss. And so my reason for making this adjustment is to show that, well, making that adjustment and not charging those COVID costs to the budget, the adjusted deficit's $1 million. And so I'm trying to give you an indication of the degree of rate increase that will be necessary. So yes, you're absolutely right. We'll have a $1.5 million deficit, and we will need to recover 1 million of that in the rate increase.
Right. And so for the 2 years, you're really looking at a $2.5 million deficit.
Yes.
I wonder how much of this is associated with maybe long-term structural changes in commercial consumption relative to residential that might result from people deciding to work where they live rather than likewise.
I've gotten some insight into that during these 3 COVID months. And, so to a large degree, for instance, my own personal water use, I've worked largely from home during the COVID period. And so my water use has been transferred from MUB's commercial account, if MUB was MUB is a water customer. So my daily water use is increased at home and decreased at work. So that's kind of a wash, but yeah, but the bigger trend is one toward lower water consumption. The federal government has mandated that all new plumbing fixtures have to be low flow fixtures, and that's actually had a cumulative effect. And we've seen the university, for example, it is, obviously a huge utility customer, and we've seen their water use and sewer use significantly reduced because of those kinds of conservation efforts. It's difficult to identify how much of the 500,000 is COVID and how much of it is true conservation, but both are at work.
I have a question sort of COVID related. If I know the university plans to come back in the fall, but if something were to happen, well, and they are extending, the length of the breaks that students will be home, do you think we'll see a big decrease in like the dorm uses? And is that going to affect it long term if we keep seeing the students go home prematurely? Now they're going to be gone an extra month, I think, between Thanksgiving and spring semester. So
yes,
is that something to account for maybe?
And we've so far we've assumed only I think it was a $500,000 reduction in sales for water due to COVID. If the university would go through another extended period of no students, as we've just concluded, that would be a significant impact on us that is not included in the budget. I'm going from memory now, but I've given you tabulations in your packets of the COVID impacts. Mm-hmm. And for the period mid-March to mid-May, we saw a 10% drop in water sales. The period mid-April from mid-March to mid-April was 10% reduction. April to May was a 12% reduction. And then from mid-May to mid-July, the first week of that 4-week period was actually a 16% drop off. But right around Memorial Day, we turned a corner. If you remember, that's when the governor announced a phased in return to normal. And that's when students began to return to town for the purposes of move out, mm-hmm. which, a lot of them, I think, moved out of whatever they were in and stayed. Mm-hmm. But following that week, we saw 1 week, so the second week in the period mid-May to mid-June. The first week was 16% down. The second week was only 3% down.
Wow. And
then the two most recent weeks have been normal. Our water use has been normal. Now, that's all compared to the same week 1 year prior.
Sure.
So when I
So
make these
summertime.
comparisons, I'm comparing to a year ago. Right.
Well, just so you know, I've been watering my flower garden and I think I probably made up for it.
Same here.
Yeah, me
You
too.
just read my mind. You're exactly right, because our water usage patterns this time of year do include a move out of students and a change in everyone's usage so that gardening and sprinkling and other irrigation needs replace those. And that's what we've seen happen.
I will tell you, there are a lot of, despite the university's push to come back to campus in the fall, I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues real reservations about teaching on ground, and real reservations. We're only 5 faculty in my unit, but there's only one person that's planning, of the 5 of us, there's only one person planning to teach on ground. And even she's going to alternate. But none of the rest of us are planning to teach face to face.
Yeah.
Well, I think your point is well taken, because we're talking about COVID now as kind of an interim situation and the board is willing to cover part of it. I think there's a part of it that's going to be permanent. And I think as we go forward, this is going to be something we're going to have to consider as far as our strategic planning and our financial planning, because we're going to have to look for ways to either make it up or to reduce our overhead, recover some of our utilities. There are going to be things we're going to need to think about, because I do think part of COVID is giving us a lesson for the future.
Yeah, I'm not reading, I think what Karen and Barbara are saying, Tim, is so we're showing a $1.5 million deficit for 2021. Those are real dollars. However they came about, right? Those are real dollars. I mean, that's a tough thing to sign off on when there's no real, I mean, there's no answer to how to solve that. As Barbara said, do we need to look at, some projects that don't get done? I mean, how do we handle that going forward? It doesn't seem to be it's a pretty big number, following another big number that was, obviously we were throwing a curveball this year. But I think going to 2021, we know what's coming. And if it changes, that'll be to the positive. I don't know. It seems to me that we might need to be looking at how do we cut into that, if those are real dollars. If you're telling us at the end of 2021, we're going to have 1.5 million less in our bank account than we did at the beginning of 2021. Well,
To that end, I'm sorry, teacher.
Yeah, is that what you're pretty much saying, Karen? Is that the point you're trying to make?
And what I'd like to see on a quarterly basis is a budgeted versus actual. I'd actually like to see some financial reports. I'd like to see actual numbers. How much did you budget, and a detail? How much did you budget for water, sewer, and all of the, not down to every paperclip, but I'd like to see detail about what was budgeted, what's actual in comparison to last year, same quarter, same time.
Yeah, we already do that on a monthly basis. All we need to do is just share it with the entire board. I think
Tom receives those, don't you, Tom?
Right.
Yeah,
Tom is the board needs to get them.
Well, beyond that, which is operational and is current, I really think we need to sit down and think about what does the future hold for us if we are to anticipate the environmental issues that the government is supporting, which is to reduce our consumption, and the fact that people are going to work more from home, that businesses are going to cut their overhead. For example, if the university does not get all the students that it wants, it's a huge consumer, even though now they're looking at saving water. So I think this is impacting everyone, and we need to back up and say, all right, how do we restructure our finances to meet this anticipated need, besides asking for a rate increase? Because across the United States right now, water is becoming so expensive. We're going to be confronted with it one way or the other, either from our consumers directly or from us saying, we've got to deal with this.
There's also a story that was on National Public Radio today about rural water systems and the fact that many of these rural water systems are becoming more and more fragile simply because their customers cannot pay for them. Now, I know we provide wholesale water to several public service districts in Clinton. I don't know what their financial viability is, but I think as part of our strategic planning, we should make some inquiries to get a better understanding of how these wholesale customers may be affected going forward, because most of them are purely residential customers instead of being a more diversified customer base like we have right now.
And I think we need to look and see if there are areas within MUB where we could be leaner, as Barbara's saying. If the demand is not there and it's shifting, it may be that we need to reconfigure MUB as well, structurally.
Well, I think the one thing that I'll clarify is that, recall, I introduced this discussion by saying that we are showing our capital expenditures and our purchases at levels where they should normally be, but we will not make all of those expenditures so that the damage to the budget is minimized. And as I move into the next portion of this budget discussion about sewer, you'll see where we've done that. We're showing a huge surplus in sewer, a large part of which results because we cut back more on our capital improvements than we needed to.
But the fact of the matter is that it would be really helpful to not just see what's budgeted, but what's actual. So, because you're telling us that what you're budgeting is not what you're actually spending.
Correct.
So I'd like to see on a quarterly basis what you're budgeting, what you're spending. And I'd like to know what deficit we're looking at way before it gets here. So June 30th is in a week, and now I know that we have $1 million deficit. I'd like to know that 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Well, I think we would.
That's when we could make changes to reduce the deficit by reducing spending.
I trust that we do some of that because I know most organizations do. The issue, though, for us is that we're in the midst of several huge capital projects that we cannot reduce significantly.
Sure.
It's, we're subject to all kinds of fines and everything else. It's a question of going beyond that and looking forward and saying, how long can we delay some of these capital projects? What capital projects are essential? And we're looking at preventive maintenance. Where do we need to put the schedule together? And if we have an exigency plan, where do we cut first? What are our priorities?
Yep.
So that would be a strong guide that we can see, and as well as everyone else using that to guide the decision making.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I just,
You bring up a good point, Barbara, in that we actually have two major portions. If you look at the capital portion of each of the four budgets,
Right.
within that capital portion, you'll see that bond funded work is labeled separately. It's all part of the same category, but we show that bond funded work separately so that it's easily identified. And so it's a wash. You're right that we've borrowed the money for that purpose. We can't do by the laws regulating the use of the bond funds. We cannot use those funds for anything else. And so those bond funded projects are kind of a wash. There's ideally the budget would show the same to the penny, the same amount of work and bond proceeds hitting the budget. And so it's an offset. So those in the big picture, those bond funded capital projects are really zero impact on the budget. Whatever comes in goes out.
Except that we then have to pay that loan back.
Right. So you got to make sure you have the amount of funds necessary to retire the bonds and not violate the bond covenants.
Right. But each of the budgets also show capital improvements performed funded by rates.
Right.
And we do $2 to $4 million worth of that work per year. And it's that variability that we take advantage of. When we know that we're running short on revenue, we cut back on those rate funded capital improvements. So that's our throttle. That's where we're able to balance revenues and cost better.
And it gives you that, but you can't forego that maintenance for any length of time. That's a real short-term fix.
Well, that's absolutely right. But for the year that it's going to take us to do a rate increase, yes, we can.
Yeah.
If you do that 20 years in a row, all right, you've made a strategic mistake. And MUB is not one of those utilities that does that.
Right.
But we can comfortably manage things over the next year so that that's a short-term strategy, a viable short-term strategy.
Gotcha.
Okay, ready to move into the sewer discussion of the budget. So it shows a projected surplus of just over $2 million as of June 30 this year. 1.3 million of that is timing of cash flow. It shows excess bond proceeds of $1.3 million for work that's already been done. So that's strictly a snapshot cash flow issue. We've also received an excess of $500,000 of construction deposits for work that will be done in the following year. And then lastly, we've deferred $1.1 million of construction that we proposed in last year's budget to do and didn't do. So if you remove those three components out, the 1.1 million of deferred construction, the $500,000 of excess construction deposits, and the 1.3 million of excess bond proceeds, the actual adjusted deficit for the year is $1 million. Of that, we project that about 900,000 of that is COVID related, which would result in an adjusted budget after pulling that out of only 95,000. And what that indicates to me is, and we had a projected deficit of 500,000. So that indicates that we cut back far more on the rate funded capital improvements than we needed to. We did not do $1.1 million worth of work that we had planned on doing, and we could have done at least half of that.
So that's the type of management you're talking about, Tim, that manages the shortfalls as you go through the year.
Correct. And that's why we've not had to make a withdrawal from our rainy day fund, because we've made it instead from our capital improvement expenditures that were planned to be done. Now,
that being said, if you didn't do $1 million worth of capital or of improvements, how much did you do?
Give me just a second. I think under that one item, the other variable that we have, I'm going from memory right now. I have to wake my other computer up.
I mean, my point's going to be, if you didn't do $1 million and you were projected to do 1.5 million, and you didn't do very much work at all. If you were projected to do 10 million, then you cut back 10, you just still did 90% of your work.
Right.
And then on the same line, then when you talk about that, I assume there's priorities there. There's needs, wants, and hopes. Where are those projects at in those categories?
And where are the people that you would have used to do the projects? Are they furloughed, not hired, standing around, getting paid?
No,
I
they're
kind of
actually
doubt
working-
anybody's standing around getting
No,
paid.
they don't hear.
They're actually working with developers' dollars. To answer your question, JT, the answer is found in the sewer capital budget
Mhm.
under projects. We had budgeted to spend $921,554. We actually spent, the projected June 30 number is 65,000. So we were budgeted to spend 921 and we spent 65. But we did $1.5 million. Those are replacement mains. We
Mhm.
did $1.5 million of new mains, most of that funded through developers' deposits. That's the other big variable, is sometimes, you know, our capital improvements work is done in terms of a long range goal. We don't, most of that work does not have to be done in any particular year. And we schedule it so that we have a steady flow of work. But when developers come to us, they of course always have a schedule, and their schedule's urgent. And so the developers, if there's a lot of developers work, it will cause us to change our own capital improvement schedule so that if there's more work, if we have an excess of developers funded work, we will cut back on our own capital improvements so that we're not contracting more of this work than is necessary, and we keep our workforce steadily assigned.
So to give us a feel, Tim, I think the conversation's going, are we, when you're talking about capital improvements and maintenance jobs and things like that, in a general comment, is there neglect in repairs and maintenance? Are these items that we're overlooking, like, you know, we're not painting our house 5 years in a row, so now the house is going to deteriorate? Or is it, are there other, are we talking apples and oranges here when we're talking capital improvements versus repairs and maintenance and things like that?
No, we're not avoiding or postponing any work that is important.
Okay.
Or any, I should say, any work that is urgent. I'm trying to think of a good analogy. You know, if you blow a tire on your car, well, you have to fix that tire. And so that we take that approach that we're not going to drive on a patched tire that has already blown 3 times and you know it's going to blow again tomorrow if you drive it tomorrow. No, we're not in that position. We're in a position of saying, well, all right, my tires have 30,000 miles on them, and I could push them to 75,000, or I could push them to 60,000. I think I'll probably schedule changing those tires at 60,000. And so that means in 2 years, I'm going to need to change them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have a preventive maintenance schedule? I mean, I know that things occur where you know, water mains break and things by accident, but do we have underlying all of this some kind of a projected schedule so that we got some plan in place, even though it's flexible?
Yes, we have a 5-year plan for our capital improvements that we update and just roll forward continuously. So we always have in mind the mains, the pipelines that need to be replaced. I hesitate. I'll object to a repair. Don't think in terms of repairs. If repairs need to be done, they're done.
Right.
Okay. If a sewer line is clogged up or not flowing, it's fixed tomorrow, regardless of what it costs. It's fixed tomorrow.
I don't consider that actual planned maintenance, because planned maintenance would probably look at aging infrastructure, where you think it may fail, where it probably should be in a preventive mode. But what you're talking about, I totally agree with. I mean, those are urgent issues that occur on an ad hoc basis. You can't really budget for that.
Yeah, so the variability that all of this discussion really addresses, the variability that I utilize to manage the system is in those long range replacements, kind of like my tire mileage analogy, where we know that we're going to need to replace this main in the coming 5 years. Now, whether we do that this year or next year is not critical as long as it's accomplished in the next 5 years.
I got you.
Gotcha. Okay.
A question related to the developers. This might make me some enemies by saying this, but is there any way, I mean, when we charge the developers, I assume we're charging for the price of the, you know, whatever work is being done, but is there a way to make up some funds there? Is there a percent increase you can add to that, or how does that work? I'm not super familiar with it.
No, we charge the developers the actual cost of the work that we perform. The PSC doesn't allow us to charge a markup. We don't attempt to charge a markup.
Okay.
And so we charge the developers down to the penny, the actual cost of the work performed. Right.
Is there an overhead charge?
Yeah, does that, I was just going to ask the same thing. Does that include overhead administration?
It does. We allocate overhead. They, of course, have objected to that in the past, and we've got a long record of PSC cases reviewing that. But the short answer is yes, they cover their portion of the overhead. So let me just, I'll oversimplify it, but let's, if 40% of our labor hours in a year are spent working on developer projects, then they pay 40% of our annual overhead.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, what about major equipment purchases? I'm sure you have a schedule for replacement of major equipment that, particularly the rolling stock.
Right. Again, look in your capital budget and you'll see, particularly in the sewer budget, a big number of $375,000, I think. Yeah, $375,000 in the sewer budget, $75,000 in the water budget. Typically, it's $450,000 a year. So those numbers show up in the budget because I wanted to present the budget to show what the spending levels ought to be. We spent $112,000 this past year of the $375,000 that the sewer budget allowed. Okay. And again, I'll come back to the replacing the tire analogy. Some of that equipment was at the end of its useful life, and it was fruitless. It was unproductive to try to stretch it and use it anymore. And so for those pieces of equipment that needed to be replaced, they were. Mm-hmm. Other items of equipment were more of a scheduled nature. The easiest example is our TV van. We have a TV van that cost in round numbers $300,000. We opened bids on it 9 months ago, and I've not brought it to you yet because it's not an urgent replacement yet. The existing equipment is working. We do have to put more into maintenance effort on it than we would like to. It's going to need to be replaced sometime in the next couple of years, but this is not the year for that. And so that's a $300,000 easy delta that I can create that will reduce that deficit. So I'm showing you the deficit in the budget as if we spent the money, but we didn't spend it.
Right.
And this is why the actual numbers are so important. It gives us the context. The budget doesn't mean as much to me if I don't know what the real costs are. I can budget $1 million for travel next year, but I might spend $100.
Yeah.
So I need that, for me, I need that context to be able to even understand the significance of anything in the budget. What do you actually spend? What does it actually cost? What does it actually mean?
All right, I got it. So 2 responses. The actual numbers for the annual basis are in the budget that we've provided you. We do show the actual budget numbers Actually, the far left, look, there's 4 columns in the budget. The far left one is actual numbers as of April 2020.
Actual, which is actual cost. Yeah. Okay.
The next row to the right of that is those April numbers projected out to June 30th. Okay, our budget is so big, it's not really possible to give you a current immediate 30-day snapshot of it. Our budget analysis always lags by 60 to 90 days. So those true actual April numbers are projected out to June 30 numbers. That's the second column.
Okay, I gotcha.
The third column is the budget for that year. So that's the real difference, Karen, that you're wanting to zero in on. You want to compare the second column to the third column to
Yep.
compare actual versus budget. All right. And
Thank
then
you.
the fourth column to the right is the proposed budget for the coming year. So all those actual comparisons on an annual basis are included in this budget report that we've given you.
Gotcha.
In addition, as Mr. Witt has mentioned, he already gets monthly reports. Now, they're on a 60 to 90 day lag, but he always gets monthly reports, and we can share those with the board as well, so that you see those numbers monthly as soon as we know what they are.
Right. And I would say an easy way of distributing those, to cut down on the amount of paper, is just to create a PDF and just send it out to all the board members as a PDF.
Yeah. And really, the capital sheet does a good job of kind of bringing most of the important numbers onto one piece of paper. But again, those reports are already created. We're happy to share them. Moving on to the Cheat Lake Sewer budget. It's a little easier. It's a lot smaller, a little easier to go through. It's showing a surplus of $141,000, but that is misrepresented because we received a large $750,000 construction deposit just before the end of the year. And all that work has not been completed. And so there's an excess of construction deposit for the year of about $275,000. That work will be performed next year. So it'll contribute to a deficit next year because there's going to be more work performed next year than we show as money received. The money was received this year and the work's going to be done next year. And just to make that more easily comprehended, I could use the word week instead of year. The money was received this week. The work's going to be performed next week. But the snapshot is taken in midweek. And so the work and the receipt of the cash are on different sides of the snapshot. So a $141,000 surplus actually becomes a $133,000 deficit when you recognize that $200,000 of that work, $300,000 of that work is going to occur next year instead. Our proposed budget for the coming year for Cheat Lake shows a deficit of $865,000, but that is inflated by 2 factors. One is that $275,000 worth of work that I just described that we got paid for that we're going to have to do. And the other is $350,000 worth of engineering work for the wastewater treatment plant expansion project, which will ultimately be reimbursed through bond proceeds. So we're going to get that $350,000 back, but it's going to be another year or 2 before that happens. So actually the $865,000 deficit, were it not for those 2 factors, would be a $240,000 deficit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, this budget also shows a significant decrease in funds available from rates for the purposes of capital improvements. This year we had budgeted $27,000, and next year, I'm sorry, the coming year shows $27,000 projected as being available compared to $108,000 projected for last year. So that indicates, again, the need for a rate increase, the fact that rates are not producing revenues sufficient to cover the projected budget. And then lastly, storm shows a surplus for June 30 of $217,000. That one is also inflated by excess bond proceeds for work that was done in the previous year. So that those are actually bond proceeds that hit this year's budget when they reimbursed us for work that was done in the prior year. Making that adjustment, that $217,000 surplus is really a $138,000 deficit for the year. I've given you some indication in the budget of how we expect to spend remaining bond proceeds. There's about $272,000 in the 2017 series remaining, and we'll exhaust all of those in the coming budget year. There's about $500,000 in the 2018 series, most of which will roll over into the next budget year. The proposed budget for FY 2021 shows a projected deficit for the storm budget of $153,000. And that one also shows only $9,000 of revenue available from rates this year compared to almost $63,000 that was available last year, also indicating the need for a rate increase. So that's everything that I have prepared for this discussion.
Tim, forgive me, I should probably know this, but can you give me like a 2-sentence description of what all like the storm water would entail? So I understand culverts and drainage, roads, and am I missing anything? Is that kind of the big picture for stormwater?
The biggest other component are ditch lines. We do a lot of ditch line maintenance, but there are storm pipes, there are storm inlets. So it's a pipeline system that to a large extent mirrors the sewer system. But another big component of it are those ditch lines. We do a substantial amount of ditch line maintenance.
Thank you.
Okay.
I know when we originally talked about the storm sewer utility, one of the biggest problems was we did not know where the storm sewers were. Is that still part of the issue? Or are we diverting and going in a different direction with ditching and other ways of doing it?
Those are parallel efforts. The effort to map the storm system continues, and we continue to send people out to locate those facilities and get them mapped.
Okay, so we've gone through the entire budget. I think there's been plenty of questions throughout the conversation. Are there any additional questions now, or we need to make a motion to approve, or where are you guys at?
I move to accept and approve the water, sewer, Cheat Lake sewer, and storm budgets for 2020 through 2021 fiscal year as submitted and explained by the general manager, with the approved budgets to be included in the minutes of this meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second to accept and approve the water, sewer, Cheat Lake sewage, and storm budgets for 2020, 2021. Additional questions on the budgets? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks for the explanations, Tim. I know that was very difficult assignment there.
Well, it's a difficult subject, especially this year with the COVID impacts and the delayed implementation of the rate increase. So I appreciate your tolerance of it. What I can do is I'll try to give you an abridged summary of what I think these numbers will look like, what the actual columns will look like, so that I'll give you my best shot at not the worst case, but the real case.
And before you retire for good, can we maybe have some conversations about how we might think about this going forward? How the future might look in terms of rates and services and demand and things like that?
Sure.
Do a little strategic thinking.
Sure.
Well, I think Barbara's made the suggestion that we really need to have a strategic planning retreat for that purpose.
I totally agree.
And I might suggest that since we're going to be in the midst of an active budget beginning July 1st, and we will have a new manager, executive director, by what, September 1st? We might want to consider that process when the new person comes on board.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Agreed. Okay. Moving on to old business.
Yes, sir. Cobin Creek Reservoir, not any huge changes there. The contractor continues to separate and classify various types of rocks and soil. Soil screening has resumed. They're about 27% complete. They remain about a year behind schedule. So the good news is they're not getting any further behind schedule, but the bad news is they're not really appreciably cutting into that delay. And I think the reality is that project's a year behind schedule. D&M Construction, our raw water pipeline contractor, there's no change from last month. I believe that they are working towards getting back in Morgantown to do the little bit of that job that remains in August or September. They're about 97% complete. Only the crossing of Don Knotts Boulevard really is the only thing that remains to be done. And that's a specialized subcontractor that they need to coordinate and get back in here. Reclaim LLC is a stream restoration firm that is working for us at Fike Run over in Preston County. Recall that's a compensatory mitigation project. And they've now begun work on stream restoration and are about 12% complete.
With regard to the completion of the pipeline through White Park, have we gotten any comments or feedback on, after all of the pain that we went through, is there anything positive as far as the community's feedback?
Nothing that I've heard. I think the best response I can give you is that no news is good news on that aspect of it. But there's still a lot of work to be done there. The city's engineering staff and ours have begun meetings now. Recall that it's our responsibility to reimburse the city for a trail design there, and then for the construction of the trail. So the city will administer all of that at our expense, and we're coordinating with the city's engineering department for that work. So that remains to be done. So the pipeline's finished. The two big things that, actually the three big things that remain to be done there, and we're working with the city toward these goals, are the design and construction of the trail, and the replanting of the trees. Remember, we cleared a 40-foot path and we said that we would replant twice as many trees as we took out, so that we cut down on the width of that open path. That remains to be done. We will work with the tree board to get the specification for the trees that are being planted and the locations, and that remains to be identified. And then lastly, there's the bridge. We agreed to pay for the construction of a bridge to connect essentially the skating rink side of the creek to the new trail created along the pipeline on the opposite side of the creek. And those discussions have begun, but that work, my guess is completion of those three tasks will easily take about another year.
Okay.
So discussions are underway, but that work remains to be done.
So where the gravel goes through there, that's where they're replanting the trees on either side of that.
Correct.
Well, personally, I run through there several times a week, and I think it's really good progress. I think it looks good. And I think as we work together with them, I think it's going to be really nice in the end.
Yeah, thanks. I share that same opinion. I think the contractor did an excellent job of restoring the area, and I think our promises that the impact on the park will be minimized and perhaps even an improvement to the park. I think those promises will be satisfied. That's the condition that I truly believe we're going to end up providing.
I think so too.
I know we're a year behind at the reservoir, but have there been any further discussions with Bull Park regarding any developments around the lake?
There have not been any recent discussions, but I'm confident that the interest remains there, and that will be an issue. And we've not tried to run away from that. We've recognized that that's a goal for the recreational community, and we're happy to cooperate and come up with a plan for that.
Okay.
Moving on into the wastewater plant project, it's about 89% complete. Recall that was about a 4-year project, and we're in the home stretch of it now. Recent work there includes replacement of blowers for the activated sludge process, upgrades to the activated sludge aeration tanks and clarifiers. New work about to begin includes underground piping from the control building to the new #1 digester. That's the tall concrete structure that you can see easily from the bridge, and upgrades to the existing primary clarifiers. So it's nice to see a transition there where, of course, we're still working on a lot of new construction, but in this last year, we're doing a lot of updates and upgrades to the existing facilities that were there before this project began. So I went through all that kind of quickly because I wanted to save time for Jim Fetty. Jim's going to give us now a virtual tour of both the dam and reservoir and the wastewater plant project. So Jim, it's all yours.
Cool.
Right. See how this goes. Okay, can everyone see that picture?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is the Coven Dam Project. The contractor is Kanawha Stone Company out of Nitro, West Virginia. And the total construction price is about $25.8 million. And when this reservoir is done, it will hold about 370 million gallons of water. And the lake that it creates will be about a 50-acre surface. So it's a very sizable structure. What you're looking at is a drone that we have that is on the north part of the property, and it's looking to the south. And for reference, behind the drone, about a mile away would be I-68, to give you a little perspective. And before I start this, I'll point out, if you can see my cursor, this rock channel here is the current location of the creek, to give you a little perspective. This road to the left is the relocated Upper Cobin Creek Road. And if you see this patch of asphalt here, it's where the former road was, and it's now been removed. And out in this area is where we had the groundbreaking ceremony, to kind of give you, for those of you that were there, give you an idea of where we're at. To the right, you see the construction of the emergency spillway. And they've got some concrete walls up, and as I get closer up there, you'll get a better view, and also have some photos we can look at as well. So I'll start the video.
No, we're showing the video.
I'll stop it here and point out that a couple things. You see this concrete pipe. It's a 66-inch concrete pipe that will be the drain to the reservoir when all is said and done. But it's currently being used to route the stream through the site. if you look up here, you see the stream coming down through some pipes and through this coffer dam, and this kind of keeps the site dry while they're working. Perpendicular to that pipe, you can kind of see this excavated hillside over here coming down to a excavated trench going through the site and up the other side. That's the center line of the dam. And in the bottom of that keyway, there's a concrete pad that the purpose of that is so we can get in there with the grout rig. And I'll show you a better picture, but right here to the right, that's the grout rig. And they are drilling vertical holes into the rock below this, about 25 foot deep, pumping grout in there. So we create a curtain so that we prevent water from going under the dam. So I'll restart the video and we'll go a little further up. If you look here to the left, this concrete structure is the intake tower. If you look closely, you can see two intake ports, and there's a third one on this side that you'll see from a picture better. But when all said and done, this is how water will get out of the reservoir and into this pipe. There will be a pipe coming out of it and connecting to this pipe, and that's how water will get to the plant. Up here to the right, we'll get a better view of it, but that's where some screening is going on. Get a little better view of that.
How many people are working on site?
There's probably 40 or so people, including subs every day up there. It varies, but that's round numbers. I'll stop it right here. This is a borrow area where we're creating material to build the dam. And if you picture the dam is in two parts, the inner core and then the outer shell covering that core. The inner core is it's going to be very particular material, less than 1 inch size particles of clay. And what you see in this stop here is the screen down here performing its work, a bulldozer pushing material down to this excavator who's loading it. The good stuff comes out here, the end loader picks it up and it takes it up here, and they temporarily roll it in place, and they're stockpiling material for the job. And in round terms, we need about 400,000 cubic yards of material to build this dam. So they've got a lot of material processing to do. I'll start this back up and we'll finish this video, and you'll see a couple other things going on. These piles that you see intermittently through the site, that's the outer shell, the upstream and the downstream shell that's not quite as critical in the size material, and those are ready to go too, but they need to get the core material finished first. To the left, you're going to see this is a borrow area that they started last year, and they have a pile started here, and then this green area along here will be additional borrow areas that they'll get the material from. And now we're going to go right up through the valley, and the tree line approximately marks where the water will go when all's said and done. So you can see it's a pretty expansive lake, a long finger here out the back. And at the end of this, we will have a sediment trap that hopefully will keep a lot of sediment up here that periodically we'll have to clean out, but it will keep it out of the main reservoir. There's a couple of photos that I'll show you. That's just an overview of the spillway work. And if we zoom in here, this is a drill rig doing kind of the same work up on the spillway, making sure that everything's solid underneath and there's no way for water to get around. Oh, can you not see that photograph?
No, we're seeing you.
Oh. Well, no, I'm sorry. That's
Hey, Lorraine.
You've got screen share working now, Jim. I can see your folder.
Give me, I got it plugged in.
I've lost it. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Get my whole computer.
Well, I apologize for this.
Yeah, it's back to
Operator.
speaker view now, Jim.
Okay. Well, I apologize. The photos are, something happened to them. Let me try one thing here and I won't.
The video was really cool, though.
Yes.
Thank
That
you.
was really neat. Thank you. Yeah, that was really neat.
Okay, let's try this one. How about that?
Oh, there you are.
There
Yeah.
you go.
I apologize. This is the spillway that you saw on the flyover. If you can notice here on the level they go to on the rock, if you see me zooming in on that, we have to get down the rocks. There's a lot of detailed, tedious work here that's taking place.
Wow.
Again, another overview. Get to something I wanted to show you. I'm zooming in. Can you see the drill rig?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That's the operation where they're drilling down into the bedrock to grout the curtain, to create the grout curtain for the water not to be able to get under it.
Did they find any coal?
Yeah, there was a small coal seam that we had to get permitted to remove, which we did. It wasn't significant. Really was more nuisance than it was valuable. So here's the intake tower.
Right.
And you can see the intake ports that will have 3 different elevations that we can take water in from. And that will allow us to, maybe get the best quality water depending on the season of the year or the level of the reservoir.
That's just too cool.
Here's another picture of the grouting operation. You can see these, and I apologize for the quality, but there's all these holes. It's like every 5 feet or so, they were drilling and doing this grouting. So it's a very detailed operation. This is the screen as a close-up view, the good material setting out here. They need to get another screen on site, and they plan to do that, but that's an ongoing operation. And the spillway, here's one of the walls they've constructed. And if you can see here, they excavated down to rock, and then they build this rebar mat structure, and then they pour the concrete walls around it. Again, a lot of work there, but they're making, the sub on the spillway is making very good progress. So I butchered that a little bit, but that's the Coven Dam Project. If you
Very
have
cool.
any questions.
That was great. Thank you so much. It was cool to
Well,
see.
Yeah, it really was.
So Jim, do you have a video of the wastewater plant?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, this is the wastewater treatment project. Contractors Ullman Shooty Construction out of Miamisburg, Ohio. I think the total construction price is about $84.5 million. This is a major upgrade to this plant. It's going to increase the treatment capacity, I believe, up to about 20.8 million gallons per day, which is a significant increase as to what the plant does now. The drone is setting at the southern end of the site. The round structure you see to the right is one of the final clarifiers. It's one of 3. We're not doing any work on that. But this first part, these tanks right here, This is the activated sludge process. It was in service before the project started, and it will remain when we're done. We are doing upgrades to it, piping, things like that. This is the activated sludge blower building. The blowers are being replaced. But again, that's just being upgraded, and it was here before. A new component to the wastewater plant is the membrane treatment process. And it's composed of, this is the membrane aeration tanks. The actual membrane tanks are housed under this roof, and I've got some photos to show you of those. The membrane building is here. There will be new ultraviolet disinfection taking place with a new outfall to the Mon River. That's been constructed. Can you video a little bit here? This existing building has been renovated and turned into a maintenance building, much needed down there. Here you see the 3 primary clarifiers and 1 out of service. We're replacing all the mechanical parts of this process. Very tight site, very contractor has not much room to work. Here's the control building that's being completely renovated, including an addition to the building. The 2 round structures are existing digesters that are going to get new roofs. That's not been done yet, but that's what those structures are. And here's the new vertical digester. It's about 95 feet tall. This is a new headworks building. Everything comes in through there and gets screened before it goes into the different processes. And what you see here is the remnants of part of the original treatment process. These 3 tanks contain the rotating biological contactors that was part of the treatment process. Those have been removed, and excuse me, and those tanks have liquid in them, but that's just a temporary thing for the construction. Those could be used for future, maybe some wet weather storage or some future project. So those have been left in place that possibly can be used for something else. And that's the end of the site. You can see the 84 lumber property here in the background. His contractor's using it for his equipment and materials.
Louis.
And I do have a few photos. This is a photo of the old RBCs I mentioned that is now going to be potentially used for wet weather storage. It was a treatment process. It's been taken out of service. This is the extent the contractor had to go to installing the new outfall from the plant. It had to have barges on the river, and of course had to get Army Corps of Engineers permission and permits. So a lot of tough work on a small site. This is an example of the quality of the work. I think this is the pre-screening building at the membrane facility. New headworks building. This is the clarifier upgrade work being done. You see a worker here putting new mechanical components in. This is inside that 95-foot tall digester. The complexity of the work is kind of shown here. You see the workers on the right, kind of precarious at times. What you see here is some form work for concrete work that's being done, and as well as the amount of rebar that goes into something like this.
And unbelievable.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
it really is amazing the work they have to do to get this done.
It's really fascinating.
This is the new tanks before they were put in service for the new membrane treatment process. And this is what a gang of the membranes look like. It's just these strings of proprietary material that process the wastewater.
So it's online now, the new one?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So that's all I had for that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Thanks,
No
Jim.
problem. Yes, sir.
So shall we move on into the GM's report?
Please.
All right, well, COVID is still with us. We still have a lot of our COVID protocols in place for the workers, including the closure of the office, so that I'll segue into that. The main office lobby continues to be closed, and actually we find that we like that setup. We get more done. We have improved security, improved airflow in the building, and we think that we accomplish all those benefits without any negative impacts on customer transactions. We've moved to all electronic, with a few limited interactions done by appointment so far, and we're really interested in adopting that as a permanent setup.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Post COVID, is there any reason that the public would want to continue to come? Would you miss anything by not being accessible by the public?
I think the answer to that really is a generational thing. People my age and older like personal interaction, and we do have a lot of older customers who do make it part of their routine to stop by and pay in person. But of course, these past 3 months during the COVID circumstances have forced upon all of us a transition away from that. And so what we're proposing is that we just simply keep the current condition and make that a permanent transition. So that's an admission that I think there will be some complaints from our older customers who just don't like that impersonal electronic format that the world has gone to. But for the most part, I'll just make up a proportion. Clearly, more than 90% of our customers are oblivious to the change, that they've adopted digital electronic transactions. We never see them in person any longer. And it's just the way that the business world has gone.
Could you make a concession to those who like to come by saying, maybe we'll see the public on Wednesdays. We're open to the public on Wednesday afternoons or Wednesday days or something like that. If you want to come pay your bill, you can do it on Wednesdays, or is that too difficult?
No, actually, that's a pretty good thought. I hadn't thought of that. We have considered keeping access available by appointment, but 1 day a week of an open lobby might be a fair accommodation. The other thing that we've pursued, so far we've not identified a bank willing to do it, but we've, in the past, we've paid banks for the service of accepting our payments on our behalf. And we thought, well, that might be a good alternative to offer, at least for the cash payment, not necessarily all transactions, but for the few cash payments that we do have. So we'll continue to pursue that as well. But that's a good idea. We'll float that past and see what it might take to make that work. We certainly do invite the board's guidance. We recognize that the closure of the lobby has PR ramifications. It does impact how we're seen to the community, and if you've got concerns about that, we'd like to hear them.
Well, maybe opening that 1 day a week will make that difference. You could put it in the paper, and
Yeah.
I would coordinate that I would coordinate that one day a week with the senior center up at Mountaineer Mall when they have an activity, because those would be the types of people who would be more than likely to stop by.
Yeah. Okay. That's good input. We'll look at those.
And that way the public can come if they really want to. You're not completely closed off.
Yeah. Moving on into COVID impacts, we've, of course, discussed some of that. I'll just repeat this one set of stats for you. Since mid-May, looking at the 4 weeks between today and mid-May, the first of those 4 weeks in mid-May, our water demand was 16% below normal, and that was the greatest deviation from normal that we had seen. The following week, demand increased to a point that it was only 3% below normal compared to the previous year. And for the last 2 weeks, we have been at normal. So for that 4 week period, we had an average.
The chairman needs to mute his speaker.
We've had an average of for the 4 weeks, that equates to an average of 4.8% decrease in demand. But again, the good news has been for the last 2 weeks that demand's been normal. So hopefully we have turned a corner and we'll see our revenues stabilize as a result of that. I've given you an updated tabulation for the financial impacts of COVID. And it has 4 columns in it as it did last month. The difference is that we're looking now at all actual numbers rather than projected numbers. Last month's version of this at least assumed what the mid-May to mid-June month would look like. And the bottom line is we're showing about an even $1 million impact, $1,020,000. Where I think that number last month was about 1.2 million or just a little bit more. So the impact has been not quite as great as we had projected a month ago, but it's still been significant. Again, 745,000 of that has been lost revenues due to a drop in sales. And the current federal law will not allow that to be recovered at all. None of the CARES funds can be used to replace lost revenues. Those other out-of-pocket expenses that you see are arguably eligible for reimbursement. But again, as we shared in earlier discussions tonight, I'm not really very optimistic that we'll see a penny of that, but we will certainly continue to chase it. Regarding the Babs refinancing, the city has retained attorney Tom Amon of Steptoe Johnson to serve as the bond counsel, and they have retained Cruz and Associates to provide underwriting services. So that means that we do have a team now assembled to get us to that refinancing. We've already met last week as a team, and we've worked with all these people before. We have great confidence in them. They always do a great job for us. So right now, this project is scheduled to actually hit the bond market and the refinance to be accomplished probably in the last week of September. So I'll keep you apprised as we progress toward that. That'll include some appearances before City Council in late July and August, I think. But those should go smoothly. And then lastly, I'll just report that on the subject of the executive search for my eventual replacement, the Giddings Group, which is the search firm that the board has retained, has more than begun their search. They are well along through it now. They've already identified several strong candidates, and they expect to deliver those candidates in accordance with the schedule that's outlined in the RFP, which is just about at this point. I think we're scheduled, I'm going from memory now, but I think that RFP anticipates that you will sort through the candidates and begin to conduct interviews next month. And I think that's entirely doable. So I expect that that's that will be achieved. And with that, my report is concluded, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, thank you, Tim. A lot there. So the next subject would be any board member issues or discussions that you'd like to bring up to the staff at this time. Okay. Sarah?
Yeah, I was just curious if we'd heard back from Mr. Dennis after you sent him the response to his questions about the recreation around the new reservoir.
I don't think that Mr. Dennis responded. No, I'm wrong in that. Yes, I got an acknowledgement back from him, a very pleasant email. No demands made in it, just essentially a thanks for getting back and appreciation of the information. And I also got a similar response from another neighbor on the opposite side of the valley, from that subdivision that you could see where the earthwork was happening. I'm sure I'll butcher the name. I think it's Runfulo or Runfulo, something of that nature. Again, a very pleasant note, just thanking us for especially the conduct of the contractor. They commented on how impressed they were with the way the contractor had taken their concerns into account and kept them informed and basically just tried to be a good neighbor. And so we're really pleased to hear that.
Great. Yeah, that makes me happy to hear everyone seems to be able to work together well. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, anything else? Okay, well, if not, I think that we need to convene into an executive session. So Tim, I need to go into executive session, and then we need to change Zoom meetings.
Yeah, we'll all need to exit this. Once the board approves a vote for that executive session, then you'll need to leave this Zoom meeting, and the executive session will be held in a second Zoom meeting. The instructions for it were included in the same email as for this one.
Right. So we need a motion then.
I move to convene an executive session of the Board of Directors under the provision of West Virginia Code 6-9A-4B2A to discuss matters related to personnel, and further move that the June 24th, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Directors be adjourned at the conclusion of the executive session.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to convene an executive session of the board. Questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Opposed? None. So we will close this meeting, reconvene in an executive session, and we will not come back to this meeting.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.